Guys, I'm so overwhelmed. What a, what a nice pile of donations you've all come in with this week. It's so appreciated. Jacqueline M, Lucas again, Sergio E, John J, Ben C, Jimmy C, and Adam C. You guys really are appreciated. Thank you so much. Uh, excellent, excellent. We're trying to build up to possibly doing a live one again, and they always cost more. So this is truly appreciated. I think that, I don't know, we do one around Christmas time every year, and I'm thinking to do one. I'm not sure, but wouldn't mind some feedback. But I was thinking about doing one with Tom Dunley as a guest, and a chance for you to talk back and forth, maybe even with him. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure where that should go, but I'd be interested in hearing from you, comments. But this could offer any sort of thing, methods related to Gamel's the history with Gamel, that sort of thing. We've done it before a little bit. Just thinking. Be interested in your comments, as I said. The Christopher C. comes in with wondering about the uniformity of the canvas, looking at your paintings, the paint skin. It's so smooth. Why do we go after that smooth, shiny look as compared to the globbed on paint with ridges? Why do the masters present this way? What does it mean for the effects we create and how we paint them? So thank you, Christopher. We've done this a little bit before. I think the video you'd be looking for was the one on ridges, because that's sort of one of the main issues with with that relates to the smoothness. Why do we do smoothness? But I didn't do, when I did that, I didn't do. I don't know that I did anything significantly with pictures. Actually, I meant to bring you a picture of one of my pictures. Don't know where it went. Where I can just rub my hand across it and show you the smoothness of it, to give you some idea what that is. But I mean, I could just as easily show you a book cover because it's that smooth. So it is true, and but also Ben C came in with this one. He's talking about the Taos painters. He that I'd mentioned before, the American painters, and he says Kaus studied with Bouguereau, from my understanding. I see as many Kaus and Joseph Sharp paintings as I can in person. I found that almost without exception, Sharps are more impressive, though I think that may be due to bad museum or gallery lighting more than anything else. Kaus clearly used a lot of paint, and whatever lighting the galleries and museums use seems to not serve Kaus's textured paintings very well. So Ben is in a position to see all that stuff down in New Mexico there. And so he knows wherever he speaks. Well, so he immediately, and I just had to throw that in because he immediately brings up this question about lighting and what happens when unforeseen ridges, when you got ridges in all the wrong places, now lighting can really screw up the visual impression. So let's just look at some paintings, just walk through this and not mess around. This is a painting I did at the very end of the Gamel era, or actually post-Gamel, on my own, and trying to create what I called a graduation piece. But I'm making these paintings kind of big for you, so hopefully you can have a closer look at them. If you're using a computer, you might be able to see them even better. But so we were trained, and this just gives you an example, we were trained to look at the Dutch painters for the smoothness of their surface. It was a conversation Gamel had with us. And I believe the primary consideration was the unobstructiveness of it. That is to say, the visual impression, that's the visual data, will be unobstructed by the paint. And I'll show you how I mean that in a couple different ways. First of all, if you have to move this thing, if you've laid this painting in the way we do it, and I'll show you examples of the lay-in, and you have to move this thing over into this area, but it then has a big old fat ridge right here. You're going to have all this sort of scraping down to do and trying to get that ridge out of there because it's going to show off like like what you'd call an echo. It's going to show a ridge in there, and it'll look like you'll look incompetent. No, your job is painting. It's like being a great violinist or something. Your job is to look like you're cool. Like everything was blown on. No matter how hard you worked and how little it was actually blown on. So that's a significant obstruction, though. If it looks tired and worked at, and everybody can see where. By the way, where your faults are, where your problems were. I like, by the way, in a way, I like Tarbell having made that comment. I don't trust a painting where I can't see where the painter went a little wrong. I think that means he doesn't trust paintings in the sense that if you get something perfect up there, for example, if you traced a photograph, you will not have gone wrong, right? You've just copied everything exactly the way it looked. And I don't know if it's just a question of him distrusting, paintings that weren't done, what we call drawn with the eyes, painted with the eyes and not with rulers or not with tracings. But this painting here was done as there was a preliminary understudy about this big, but I didn't even think for a second to bring that. And then there was it might have been pastel even. And then this is just laid in. I did not do this in the Gamma method where we would do a full-scale drawing and then pounce the drawing, poke holes in the drawing, make a tracing, poke holes in the tracing, and then hold it up against the canvas and pounce it to the holes where, so you can trace the lines. We did that with Gamma very much. That's why I say Gammel's was an academic education. That is not a Boston School way of operating. I haven't even seen studies to answer one of your questions. One of you sent something out to me. I've never ever seen a study in the sense of a miniature little thing like I do. I've never seen that done by Boston School guys. They put out their canvas and go for it. And, it's all one process. Much as you'd say that was said about Sargent as well, that it wasn't done all in one shot, one day, but it was a single process. And you kept moving through from the start right through to this kind of a finish. So, but the second thing that was being referred to, and I'll just show you pictures where this happens, is that if you make ridges, they will, and let's say in a shadow area, if you got a ridge here where it's supposed to be shadow, and you have a ridge where the plate used to be, why don't we say right there, and you move the plate over, but you'll have a ridge, it'll wreck the atmosphere. It'll wreck the atmosphere of the shadow. So, but then the next thing is, if you have all these obstructions, meaning you have a lot of claw ridges and all over the place, then it becomes significantly more difficult to beautifully articulate such lines and forms as these little ones inside here, or the bumps on top of here. If you follow what I'm saying, there'll be obstructions to the movement of the brush. It won't go on. The brush won't. You can't cut a clean, beautiful line. All the next levels of data. So just say here you're trying to paint this thing, or even the spoon. So you're trying to paint the spoon, but you got ridges and chunks all over here. It's going to be very difficult to draw that beautiful line, draw that clean line that's showing the various reading, silhouetting edges. So I don't want to make this hugely long. That flatness thing certainly comes out of the Dutch background. I mean, we know all the still lives. We're sent to look at those still lives by lots of different guys, Kolff and others. And for just that sort of glassy surface, nothing was being done with ridges in the sense of any forming anything or anything like that. And they were making virtually no attempt, until you talk about Rembrandt, to make expressive brush marks. It was all, the intention was to eliminate the brush marks, to hide the brush marks. And then Holbein here, when you look at his work, it's just an example of how much flatter could painting be, could it possibly be, right? And and he's just a fairly, maybe an overstated example, but it's not very different from what you find in most of the academic post that era. So Boston Museum of Fine Arts had paintings. I think the one on the right is theirs, and there's another one of a kid that's even more so, shall I say. But what I recall about the Mancini paintings is that the paint on them was like it was. I don't know. It might have been a half-inch thick. I mean, it felt like it was a half-inch thick, sticking off of the canvas. And you can see areas like here where the form is so distorted by paint sticking out. And probably true here, although in some ways this looks like it might be an attempt to use crusty paint in a sculptural way. People try to do that. I suppose in some sense we all tried to do that as you're plowing your way through painting and what painting is and what painting isn't. There's some of those things do come up. But Mancini is a really good example of how lighting then deforms the picture. This picture is just a horror show and this guy's a very good draftsman. There's nothing wrong with his skills, but his methodology, depending where the light source is, if it's not exactly the same light source as his, you're going to have shadows cast from one pile of paint to the next, and it's going to be distortive, right? It's going to distort your image. So that's a very straightforward, simple thing. By the way, don't take anything I'm saying to be about what you mustn't or must do. There may be an aesthetic reason. This John the Baptist, this whole thing has this ratty feel about him, which makes you very much puts you in the sense of who John the Baptist was. Locusts and wild honey. Well, what was he wearing? Goat skin or something? I forgot what it was, but he definitely was dressed. It's just definitely living that wild man life. This is John the Baptist, the precursor to Christ. And but yeah, you can see some of this too. I don't have a fetching in front of me, but this reminds me a little bit of what you see in fetching. There's a certain amount of paint clawed on there or piled on there in ways that can be distortive. A lot of people do use palette knife and stuff like that. As I said, I don't have any problem with amusing yourself with your surface and all that sort of thing. I'm just saying the reason, especially as a student, the reason you don't do this is when you want your drawing to show well, and when you want to be able to paint further and further levels of detail without having to draw this beautiful fine little line over lumps and clumps. So I think that should be pretty clear to you. So let's just go on. Now Monet is an example of a time when it's actually quite a good thing. He isn't doing this self-consciously, in my view, at least not much, for the purpose of making a ridgy surface that's so fun to look at, as much as he's trying to get solid paint with real color quality, and he's just wanting to put it down and leave it, clumping it right on there. So you can look closely at these or find them online. Yeah, you can see the chunks all over the place. You can see chunks and chunks of ridgy paint. But you see what's happening here. This isn't fine line drawing. It's about great color blobs and color movements. And landscape, anyway, is basically very textural. I would have shown you the textured skin on the one or two of Monet's women, where it's a pretty ugly thing to look at when you're looking at something as smooth as human skin. But look at the haystack. How can you go wrong? I mean, part of plowing that stuff on there in clumps, making it side by side two different values side by side, it creates the sense of texture, and which is very much it's very true to the illusion, if you want to call it that, of the haystack. When you do it up in the sky, that's when you're starting to get these shadows. You see, in the way this one is lit, you can see lines of shadow in various little places right through here. So the light coming down through here. Now, did he not see that when he was painting? Who knows? It's very bright outside there, all that sort of stuff. But it doesn't seem to damage when you look at the painting from the proper distance, right? Now you take a small painting, a miniature painting, for example, and if you do this and you're looking at it right here, it probably would be very distortive. Say a little portrait, done in the sizes, like this. So here's Benson doing a version of it. You can see the clumpiness in various places. Here, this is definitely ridgy, thick paint. By the way, he probably is the guy that does it more than the others. But he brings drawing. In some places, you're going to see a very nice sharp-edged line. But he isn't in keeping with fairly typical Boston School thinking. He isn't drawing a lot of things. He doesn't have to be too worried about significant areas. A few spots, like this one right here, where he really wants to articulate a beautiful. You can see the necessity for a clean, a smoothish background, so he can cut that line beautifully as a tree. Would be less important than virtually any of the other ones. But that would be this is an example of somebody who's doing some combination. He's using some fairly rough paint, but he's finding himself a way to make sure he maintains areas where he has to articulate with some sort of line finesse. Mostly these paintings aren't about that, but they are in fact about the grand impression, inclusive of points of articulate contrast. So you'll find this fairly typically. You'll find spots like this that are very nicely articulated. Now, you can see here how he conceivably could have had a little bit easier time if that wasn't quite so clumpy. But that's just in that way of thinking, in that one, perfectionist thing. The surface of these paintings has to be, for any painting, really, you want the surface to have consistency within itself. You don't want to look like you're doing some texture in the tree and have the paint be different in different spots. You want some sort of a sense of harmony per paint. Do you know what I mean? That's the way I feel about it. That it doesn't mean you can't have some element of more or less paint, but I haven't found that. I haven't seen paintings where that works well. Typically, you're going to be doing something like this or Monet, or you're going to be in Gero or Bugro land. Okay. So here's one where you can see a lot of the clumps. This is a start by Tarbell that I've showed you numbers of times before, but you can see even though he's clumpy, let's say he's putting on a lot of paint, you're not seeing as many ridges here. You're seeing some down here where it's probably not going to matter because this area is so ridgy. And by the way, there is a certain amount of scraping. When you're reading Sargent, he talks about scraping down the portrait the next day, scraping it down. Why? Is it because of those ridges? Undoubtedly, unless it was wet and he's actually scraping the head out, which is another discussion about scraping. But you would have an area that's largely textural, like this entire passage, except for some of the lights, and it's no problem at all to be broken, to be thick in paint. Yeah, you can see places though down in through here where he's clumpy as can be, clumpy stuff. But it's I'm saying again, it's in keeping with the Monet model where you're trying to make as much of as powerful a statement as you can about the quality of the color producing the light, and the color of the light, it's the quality of the light, but the color is a big factor in all that. So if it doesn't show, if you're not putting enough paint down, what I didn't mention, it's not going to work as well. But what I didn't mention is that what I'm finding over years is that Monet, his color stays up. With other people, a lot of the salon type painters, the academic painters, the paint is very, very thin, some glaziness, and there's changes that are happening that you may not be so happy about. Now, we're not going to all just paint like Monet just to get our paintings to last. That's not the point. I mean, but it is a thing though that's something to think about, right? You might argue in a sense the thicker the paint, and the purer the notes, the better they're going to last. I say pure meaning in the sense that we know that flake white gets with some of the lakes, and they'll eat the color. They'll destroy each other. One will eat the other, shall I say? But apart from that, these things shouldn't be a problem. And most of the paints we use now aren't the high chrome ones. Are not those kinds of dangerous paints. But this is fun to see lay in. You can look at the original marks down here. That's all pretty thick paint, but it's not grossly fat. It's something you could paint over. So when you see paintings that are starts, it's so good to have them because you can look at spots and begin to see, get a better inkling what, such as this, a painter might have been doing in the very first phase of his painting. Like how much paint. Never mind the direction of the marks and all that sort of stuff. I was talking to some of my students about the irregularity of marks. Some up, some this way, some that way. Um, yeah, let's get on because we're going to lose our day. I've copied this painting I've mentioned to you before, so I know what Bouguereau's surface is like. His paint is solid paint, but it's very fused and it comes off as very thin. But it's all there. Um, it's the thinness of it has become a problem because when the restorers get a hold of stuff, they've been skinning his paintings, leaving nothing but some traced outlines on certain passages. For example, the one in Denver that I saw when I was a kid. And but nevertheless, this is a perfect example of the kind of smoothness that's fairly characteristic. And it has a lot to do with wanting to push the drawing in finer and finer directions, articulating hair in very. This is more of a study as it comes across, but articulating sometimes hairs, individual. But to get to a place, where where you're going to work it up and work it up, so the level of detail in passages like this. Um, Whatever you do in a lay-in, you're going to want to keep doing. You want to keep improving it. You get this laid in, you look at it, and you're going to keep working to greater and greater levels of detail, different kinds of fineness of drawing. Well, it's the last place you want to be fighting with bumps and hills and valleys and all that stuff. So this is a pretty nice example. You'd be hard pressed to find any piece of paint in there making any kind of a ridge at all. This is, by the way, another one of those that we just enjoyed so much. If you get a chance, you'd really like to see it. It's probably 10 feet high or 12 feet high at the museum in the Clark Museum in Williamstown, Massachusetts. Now, this is probably, you might say, the perfect example of why you don't want ridges. And this is Jerome. Jerome, in some ways, and there was some evidence of his use of photography, and I don't mean to say any of these are done from photographs, but I think his looking at photographs made him aware of finer and finer detail, or maybe even made him love it. Not that there aren't historic painters through history that do love some, aspect of fine detail, but what you're looking at, the kind of stuff you're looking at here would be very much impeded to articulate all this little stuff if you had ridges and piles of paint and all that sort of thing. No, so this isn't landscape anymore. Landscape, it's so much easier to get away with that stuff because there's so much texture in the field, in the woods or whatever. There's so much just simple brokenness that it corresponds. It could be said to be part of the look of nature. It will come across as appearing like that. And I've shown you that Vinton passage in the canal. There's a section where the paint is just clawed on there. And I never noticed it for years and years. I never noticed it until one day I was looking to see what I could find out about the way he started and that sort of thing, preliminary marks. That was very interesting. But you look at the passages like this area here and all that fine data. Look at this stuff in here. You can't do this kind of stuff if you got a surface that's fighting you. Now, that's one thing, but you also have a harder time moving, as I said before, so we just bring that back again. If this turns out to be, or if you just decide you want it in a different place, it gets more difficult. You can sometimes see in Sargent's work where he was sometimes more careless of ridges or just simply having done in direct painting, these may have been done from drawing, probably were done from drawings, tracings, but you'll see very significant shifts and you'll see over years echoes of those shifts. Sometimes a value echo, like a white shirt, will suddenly have a dark stain, looking like it's the same pattern as the side of the jacket. So you can see where it was at one time. If you have that plus a ridge, that gets to be really obnoxious. In a way, I mean, sometimes it's a lot of fun to see the marks that painters made, isn't it? To see if you want to say it that way, in the Tarbell way, where they went a little wrong. But if you're trying to do a painting like this one, which is, what is this about? I don't know if it's 40 inches maybe wide, maybe bigger than that. But these figures are not huge. They might be a foot high. They might be I think they must be less than that. But the sheer amount of data in here, and it's all fine drawing type of articulation. This isn't really a great photograph of this, but you begin to get the idea of how difficult that would be. Now, the other side of this, of course, is they are doing this flat because they are working from drawings. They can trace the drawing and they just draw the inside of it. And, in the case of Jerome, I don't know if I have any of those studies, but he's working clearly from top to bottom frequently. You know what I mean? And I've done that in some illustration work I've done preliminary drawing and then just simply trace it and paint the head down to the shoulder, down to the feet, because I already know everything I want. You know what I mean? But when you're doing impressionistic work, this gets to be more. It's not. This isn't what we do impressionistically. That's why even doing a grisaille or any of those things, it's not an impressionistic model. That's all. That's what you're going to get. That discussion is what you're going to get from watching the rest of the videos that I do. Too bad this is a little bit washed out. This picture is such a remarkable picture. This is the one the MFA puts out there. It's too bad. The MFA owns this. Of course, these are the ones I'm showing you. Significant numbers of these are the ones I looked at as a young painter. He may have a tiny bit of texture in the lights. The old adage, thin in the darks, thick in the lights. Well, sometimes like this here, you'll find passages like that may have some ridginess compared to the rest of it. Just cause, right? Is it a question? Isn't a question? That's one of the things that ridges and texture will do. It'll pick up the light. It can pick up the light. It can enhance the lightness. And you might play tricks like that if you're having a difficult time with, if you didn't key well to get all you wanted out of those highlights. But this is the one that Gamble said we don't even know how he could possibly have done that. He's talking about this skirt. You can read it. It's in the Twilight of Painting, but he also discussed it with us. But the sheer fineness, the finesse in and this is just like literal realism, counting, and no matter where you look in this thing, I mean, it's just astonishing amount of little fine detail here. Even the drawing in through these passages here. Look at this stuff in here. This is just madcap, isn't it? I mean, but in all those places, I said you'd be fighting yourself. So this is fairly characteristic, and I'll just maybe end with that. It's fairly characteristic of imaginative work. If you're piecing it together. Now I don't know, by the way, that this might have been painted from life. The guy just standing there with this whole setup just that way. I'm rather doubting it, although it's entirely possible that Bart did that from life. So I still wouldn't describe it simply as impressionistic in one sense. It's still an imaginative. Well, it isn't that. It's a storytelling work. It has a slightly, clearly a different motive from a guy who's trying to describe to you the light of the day and the magic of the color impression. But nevertheless, yeah. So, but you look at you'd want to look at some of the struggles of Titian in his later work, or even some of the marks in some of Velasquez, where he's doing this venture into this new impressionist territory. And you won't find that he's struggling much with surface. That seems to have been just a part of the exercise, part of what you learn to be good at, part of the disciplines of what he was taught. But for students, that's really the most important thing to learn. How can you make a flawless surface? And then making wild surfaces and all that. So don't try to find your way or try to find your art form. Learn how to draw well. Learn the medium and see what it'll do. What it does this sort of thing best for. What you're seeing here is in this barg is an example of what a basic skill level you want to be at before you start wandering out there and venturing into wild territory. And I am definitely not talking about tracing a photograph to get there, which is a whole different thing based on something I saw recently online. I get so tired of what comes up online. I'm sure you do too. I tell my students frequently, don't look left or right. Just keep coming to the studio and doing what you love. The world is so full of wild stuff. How am I doing here for time? Sort of okay. I don't want to overextend this. Alfred Stevens is a nice example of somebody who thought big and could push levels of detail. His stuff has that in it. You can see that he's got impressionist, as it were, marks little Manet feeling in certain parts of this thing, and but again, it's the same thing. Just the ability to work a thing up is what's going to be inhibited if you have all sorts of ridginesses. Again, you can scrape them out, but so here's a tarbell. I mean, here's a sergeant lay-in, and you can see that if you're going to push this, you'd want this to be free. If you're going to create a beautiful texture, although on here texture, but if you find there's some actually sergeant isn't going to, but if you're going to articulate some lace in an area like this, and this is your lay-in, you'd be able to do it if these things aren't too thick. But this isn't a great example, but it would be if you looked close at this one. You'll see passages where there's some thickness, but you don't see ridges per se. And if you just chose to start something like this, just chose to end this thing after having started it, who knows, what he might have just left there. You shouldn't be careful about putting down marks that are without ridges and stuff. Well, I mean, I think you actually should learn to do it ridge-free right from the beginning, but the problem is you need to make sure you get enough paint. Enough paint is paint that is easy to work with and is susceptible to receiving another layer and isn't ridgy. So that's what I call enough paint, the right amount of paint. I like that what Ang said, how much, he said, that's the right amount of paint, pointing to the wall painter, that's the right amount of paint. It's always a discussion, what's the right amount of paint? The wall painter would not use excessive paint, he'd have to pay for it. So here's something that's going to get worked up. Oh, I did mean to, that's there. So typically, this is Paxton, and typically Paxton is going to work stuff up right into this sort of data, level of data. So you can see the little folds, and they're very real. This isn't impressionistic in the sense that a Tarbell or Benson might be. And by the way, impressionist doesn't mean inaccurate. It means not pushed to the nth degree of the realism of every little noodled spot. But and this is somewhere in between. But you can see all the folds in here. This is very much what I'm going to call the realism of Paxton. Different from the impressionist stuff of Benson. Why am I mentioning that? Because you can start here, and this one has some texture to it, but this was taken away from him. He sold this to someone for purposes of using it as a demonstration, start demonstration. It's nice that it hangs at the museum where he was teaching at the time that it was bought from, and where it would have hung for the purpose of students looking at a start. But this is a really nice example of a start that's fairly loose. The marks are fairly, very impressionistic. Beautiful search for color. And yet it's not finessed yet, right? So this surface won't want to be textural in any difficult way. He can do all sorts of paint moving and stuff like that, but he isn't going to be building up textures and then having them dry. That's a big deal to have me say. You could have textures. You can put down marks that have textures. You may, the first bunch of paint I set down has usually got more paint than I want, so I cross it. I just walk the brush around, not trying to smooth it out, but just take the ridges out of it so there's no excess of paint there. That's sort of what you're seeing here, the marks throughout this whole thing. When you look at it in person, there is a certain crispy thickness of paint, but it's not ridgy. It doesn't have problem areas. You'll get to, he's working up this area more and more than other areas, so he could get to a point where this is worked up, and who knows when this was really ripped away from him, or what he would have done if he wasn't confident about that. We used to, with Gamble, be advised to just take a palette knife and scrape out ridges, pull them right out. Pull them out literally, push the lights into the darks, and come back and make them finer the next day, make them more finessable even. But what we did it for was to get rid of the ridges in most significant part. Or if it was poorly placed like this here, then you thought, oh, this is supposed to be up here. You might just paint it right out and lose a bunch of that arm of that chair, but that's for a different reason. So I think I've fairly well covered that territory. Now you can see again here the Boston School lay-in, and this is a classic Boston School lay-in, where there are lots of areas of the paint covered that are going to be covered with more data, more detail. And in all the places we're talking about, all through the whole thing, unless the area itself is already going to be fraught with texture, you don't want to be building up texture. You want to be able to move this line up into here and not leave a ridge down here. Do you see what I'm saying? But in this way of working, this isn't a preliminary drawing. We can just draw the girl smooth. This is about hitting notes, putting them down, leaving them, and all that sort of thing, and being all over the place at once. And you're going to be going back into every area again and again and again, right through till the very fine end, which might very well end like this. So you see how safe you want to be. Yes, you have that, but you got to be thoughtful about where you're going to wind up. So if your ridges are annoyingly bad, this is going to be a really difficult line to put down straight. Now you could use a straight edge and do it, but almost looks like he might have, where typically he doesn't. But no matter where you wind up making an edge or doing any kind of a drawing that really matters, you could even talk about a spot like that. Any place that you have wild ridges is going to give you a headache. But now I'm beating a dead horse probably. But you can see that what you want to do, what we're talking about now is in this kind of painting, like an interior like that, is what you're doing in the preliminary levels. And that's sort of a very standard thing, even in a landscape. Put down the kind of paint you think it's going to be good underneath the previous paint. And again, I wanted to say one last time, I love paint and I love what it can do in so many ways. I love smooth the surfaces of some of these early Dutch. I love and by the way, the Chardin is a little bit of a mix of both. Rembrandt starts smooth, and all of a sudden he's doing clumpy stuff all over the place, very much expressive of texture of a face, for example, or of a certain kind of a jacket. It goes suddenly very impressionistic. But that whole idea, though, winds up being having two components. One is the sort of like many things, there's sort of the decorative, well, why don't we just say it that way? The decorative, the amusement of the surface itself, and the other one is the realism of it. And sometimes the best way to get certain kinds of passages, like in some of these jackets he's got these people wearing, sometimes maybe even with something like mail, the mail garment. The mark making may very well be just that, and may need my ridges and junk like that may be required just to begin to get the illusion across that you're trying to do. So the aesthetics and the realism of it are both always going to be there. You can use it. It can help you. I'd suggest, though, that in the case of the person who's trying to paint like a Boston School painter, that you avoid ridges, looking in your lay-ins, which will look like this. Just make sure you don't leave any nasty ridges there that are going to be difficult for you tomorrow, because everything in here is susceptible of moving and it's susceptible of greater detail. Okay? And that really ends it. I don't think we have any more to this sermon. Yeah, that's really it. All right, Chris, I hope that's helpful. I know I didn't just fixate on landscape, and you're really focused on that yourself. But some of that discussion you've heard before, and we'll talk about more another time. Okay, wish you all well. Thank you again, you marvelous donors. The abundance is overwhelming. This week's gifts to the program. Jacqueline M, Lucas Dos S, and Sergio E, John J, Ben C, Jimmy C, and Adam C. Thank you guys ever so much. And these, are these all? I think all you guys have given before, so I think that means a huge amount to me. And I really hope, as some of you guys have said to me more recently, have been saying to me that you're actually improving your painting. As you get along there, be willing to show and tell too. I'm interested in seeing that and being of any help. Numbers of guys have come to me asking for a little crit. One of you guys just last week. So, okay. I hope you guys have a great painting week, putting all this stuff to work, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.